hasn't materialized as of now. We continue to try to make sure that these lines of communications exist.
I want to come back to the tenor of that speech and what it was trying to say. Help us understand this. What do you see as the potential flashpoints for possible conflict? Where is the most vulnerable point in your territory?
Well, what we have, I mean, perhaps you could already describe some of the events that have occurred as flashpoints, where there have been collisions. There's been the water cannon. I think Australia has experienced the same thing, where they shine lasers at our vessels. All of these things have happened, and so we try to take a step back, without, of course, conceding any of these rights that we feel are ours. But I think it is just the entire South China Sea right now. The critical, I suppose, the critical areas will be the Luzon Strait, which is the northern strait between the Philippines and Taiwan, which is one of the passages out into the Pacific, and the same on the southern side, on the southern end. And those are possible because if there is any attempt to dominate the region, that those two very critical passages must be controlled by whoever is making that attempt.
And do you think that, in fact, the situation that the Philippines faces with these threats to Philippines' territory right now is actually a more dangerous situation for the region and the world than the issue of Taiwan?
I think it's, I don't know if you can separate the two. I think they belong as, they're part and parcel with one another. In the very beginning of all of this attempt to dominate, as I said, once again, South China Sea, it was seen as being directed solely at Taiwan. I think we've moved on from that. And it is more perhaps China wanting to be a world power, a global power. And that is why it's important that they have access to the seas of the world.
Let me just ask you this question. I want to come to the what it is that you want from Australia, because that's obviously one of the reasons for your visit and your speech, as well as ASEAN. But the former president of the Philippines, Duterte, was making overtures to China, very strong ones. Have you decisively moved away from Chinese influence and back into America's orbit?
Well, I think it's important to make it very, very clear. Whatever the Philippines does because it is in our interest, not because it has been dictated upon us by anyone.
You don't think that your language that you used when you took office, and the same language that you used in the Australian Parliament during your visit, is a message to China about where you believe your interests lie? Well,
as I explained it to President Xi again, I said it's my duty. I took an oath to defend the Philippines. And anyone who will help me in that regard, I must engage with them.
Was your predecessor getting too close to China?
Well, I think the situation between now and then is quite different. And I'm sure he did what was in his judgment was the best. He did hew a little closer to China rather than the United States. And maybe because things have heated up a little bit, but we have together with Australia, we have a visiting forces agreement with the United States and Australia. These are the only two countries that we have them with. And we have a mutual defense treaty with the United States, which has been there for decades.
But do you think, just before we move on to Australia, do you think that that was a mistake to hew more closely to China?
I don't know that it would have made any difference one way or the other. I think China is going to do what it's going to do.
But clearly you've made a decision to be explicit about the Philippines' desire to protect itself in a way your predecessor wasn't. It is different.
In my view, I just didn't have a choice. I think that is what my duty dictates as leader. And I think we have to be very, very clear how we are positioning ourselves. But the prospect of giving up anything to anyone is completely untenable as far as we are concerned.
How important is it, from your point of view, that Australia has chosen to acquire and build a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines?
Well, that decision is an Australian one.
Do you support it?
I support AUKUS. I support the Quad, and I think that this just represents a stronger front in terms of maintaining the peace, maintaining the peace in the South China Sea. Unfortunately, it has become necessary. I wish we didn't have to do this, but we do. So it is a response, really, to a differing situation, a more dangerous, more risky situation than we had before.
Why is it more dangerous? Just explain.
Because the potential for outright conflict is much higher now than it was before. And we worry in the Philippines because it could come from not a strategic decision by anyone saying, okay, we're going to war, but just by making some serviceman making a mistake or some action that's misunderstood. And that's why the ongoing attempt is always to try and lower the temperature, ease up on the rhetoric, and communicate, and just continue to communicate.
That's why you need the phone, the same phone that Khrushchev and Kennedy had, right?
That's right. Yes.
Well, let me try and understand what you might want from Australia. Would you expect the Australian Navy to come to the defence of Philippines forces in the event of conflict with China over disputed territory in the South China Sea?
Well, I suppose if we are in a joint exercise or in a joint operation, then perhaps that would involve Australia in that. But we do not have any formal agreement or treaty in that regard as we do with the United States.
How would you explain to Australians, to Australian servicemen or women, why they should potentially risk their lives in the aid of Philippines under pressure from China? Why do we belong there?
Well, let me take us back to the Second World War, where the defense of Corregidor and Bataan, which were the outposts that held out longest. But because of that, it delayed the invasion of Australia to the point that the Japanese never invaded Australia. And that, if we can stop it at an early stage, nip it at the bud, as it were, then there's no need for it to grow into other areas, other regions. And hopefully, if we can, at best, as I said, keep the peace in the South China Sea, that will be of great advantage to Australia, because the peace is maintained.
It's clear to you that it's a vital interest for Australia.
I think so, because the encounters are in our area. We feel very much on the front line here. So if we can settle it at this front line, then it needn't go anywhere else.
So let me just ask you some other questions, because clearly, as Australia considers this and considers its responsibilities in the South China Sea and towards the Philippines and other countries that it has relationships with in the region, the importance of who are our stable allies or our stable friends, not formal allies, but friends, becomes very important. So I want to ask you, in relation to the former president, it's clear from the outside that there's been some breakdown in the relationship. I mean, do you intend now to invite the ICC to the Philippines to conduct its investigation more fully into former President Duterte's murderous war on drugs?
No, that would be a political move. And what we are, we do not play politics with jurisdiction and sovereignty. And the position that we've taken is that we do not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC, and we view it as a threat to sovereignty, simply because the ICC was formed to conduct, to provide justice to areas where there is no judiciary, where there is no court system, where there is no police, where there is no peace and order. And that's not the Philippines. And therefore, I don't think that their investigations or their actions apply to the Philippines. Beyond that, we also have withdrawn from the Rome Statute, so we no longer are a signatory to the ICC
So
agreement.
if it's not the ICC, then who provides justice for the many thousands? I think the number is something like 12 to 30,000 people who were killed in former President Duterte's war on drugs. How do they get justice?
I think we in the Philippines have, as I said, a functioning police force. We have a functioning judiciary, and that it is their responsibility to take care of that. We have made a great deal of progress in that regard, where many policemen have already been removed from service because they've been found to be liable. Their cases have been filed. Many are already in jail.
Do you think it adds up to justice for those people who lost their lives?
Well, what we try to do is to now go back to the families of those and see that perhaps see what we can do to make things right for them. As long as it can be shown, of course, that they were not actually involved in the drug trade. As I said very early on, we're not interested in a small-time addict, for example. The addict, you take them to the hospital, you take them to rehab.
You don't shoot them.
We don't. We said we've taken enforcement as far as we can, and it only gets you so far.
You carry a very well-known name. Your father was overthrown by a people's revolution, and you are his only son. How do you resist the impulse to authoritarianism?
I have no impulses to authoritarianism whatsoever. We have a good system going. We are, I think we've learned to, we have a constitution that we have, that we have gone by for the last 36 years now. We are hoping to make some changes to it. But no, I have not felt any tug or temptation to make it a more authoritarian system. Quite the contrary. What we are trying to do is to bring government down as low as we possibly can. And when I say that, what I mean is that closer to the grassroots. And we've tried to make government less, the organizational chart less vertical and more horizontal. And so it's quite the opposite is what we're trying to do. Besides, there is no need for it. In my father's time, we were fighting two wars on two fronts internally. We had the secessionist movement in the southern Philippines, and we had the communist guerrillas in the countryside. So there was a necessity because there was war. We have, thankfully, made a great deal of progress in that regard.
Now, of course, you had your first political post as vice governor during the time of martial law. I understand that you revere your father. Do you also understand the costs?
When I became vice governor, there was no longer any martial law.
I beg your pardon. I thought that coincided. Let me put it like this: you've been a politician for a very long time. You have a very clear understanding of your country's history, and you obviously revere your father. I've seen you talk about him. Do you also understand the costs of his authoritarian rule to people in the Philippines?
Well, it was a very different sort of authoritarian rule. I think when people think of an authoritarian rule, it was non-participatory. Whereas I think the version that my father tried to promote and actually practiced was very much still with the participation of all stakeholders that were involved. It was just a peace and order situation that really dictated the necessity for the declaration of martial law.
Let me just understand make sure that we're talking about the same thing. I think Amnesty records that during that period, 70,000 people were imprisoned, 34,000 tortured, and 3,200 people killed are the numbers. And your father, in an interview, admitted that over 50,000 were detained. So I just want to ask you again, do you accept that there was a human cost to that rule?
There always is. It was war. And with war, the death and destruction is inevitable. But this is a war not declared by the government of the Philippines. This was declared a war. These wars were declared on the government of the Philippines, and both of them were. One was to divide the country, and the other one was to remove the present political system by armed struggle.
Do you regret the deaths that occurred under his rule? In his name, do you regret the deaths that occurred?
Of course. I regret every death that ever happens to any Filipino for whatever reason. There
is one series of questions that comes up in relation to your father's time, which is of course the question of corruption, which became wholly associated with the Philippines for a long period of time. I think contemporary court judgments acknowledge the atrocities that were committed, but also the plunder of the country's resources. Why wouldn't you want all of that money back in the hands of the Filipino people?
Well, the narrative.
May I just ask you why that's funny?
Why
that's funny? I'm asking you a question about the plundering of large sums of money from the Filipino people.
I'm thinking that maintains, that idea maintains, because I take exception to many of the assertions that have been made, and I think since the cases were filed, the government fell. Cases were filed against me, my family, the estate, etc. And up to now, we have the assertions that were made, we have shown to be untrue.
Quite a lot of money. I think 5 billion was already recovered. I guess the question is just this: do you not want to see all the money that was taken returned to the people?
We have signed. This family has signed a quitclaim. Signed many quitclaims. Any money that you find is yours. And finish. And everything was taken from us. We were taken to Hawaii. Everything was taken from us. We had nothing left.
Not the view of the Presidential Commission.
I'm sorry?
Not the view of the Presidential Commission. This is my final question on this topic.
Which Presidential Commission?
In the Philippines. Their view is there's a large amount of money outstanding.
I think that having seen the facts as they have been slowly revealed, with further true investigation, not propaganda, but actual true investigation, like court cases and investigations by all kinds of NGOs, different agencies. Since that has changed, and people can see that it was propaganda.
I suppose the question is, other countries in the region, including Australia, want to know that the Philippines, and you in particular, as a Marcos, have come to terms with your family's history.
Well, of course we have. Yes, we continue to do the work that we feel is our duty, and you cannot do that otherwise. We still have to. I think that those issues, we are no longer. There was a time where the issue was Marcos. That's not the case anymore, and that's why I think the best proof of that is my election.
President Marcos, thank you very much indeed for speaking to 7:30.
Thank you.